help me make it through this. As soon as I get a chance to sneak in behind the computer here, I'm going to get started. Oh no! What did I kick?
That was me.
Oh, okay. Oh, we have people joining us. That's awesome. Okay. Let's see if I can make it go forward. There it is. Okay. So, in the introduction, they talked about proclaiming Colorado's Black history. There was a display set up in Boulder about 2.5 years ago. One of the things that they did was they invited historians from around the state of Colorado to come out and talk and actually decide what needed to go into that display. And I kind of sat up and said, hey, what about Pueblo? I said, you know, there's a lot of Black history in Pueblo. And they said, well, like what? And we talked about Beckworth, and we talked about the old Lincoln home. And I know everybody here has seen the old Lincoln home, right?
Yes.
Okay, it's on Grand Avenue, 2700 block. If you haven't seen it, go by and take a look at it. It's awesome. But so I got started in this, and I thought this is really kind of interesting. But let me tell you a little bit about who I am. We had a pretty good assessment of who I am. I'm a native of Colorado Springs. I am a college student that went to SCSC. As a matter of fact, I found it kind of interesting. I practiced football across the street here in 1973. I graduated from the University of Southern Colorado, now CSU Pueblo, in 1976. I was an ROTC graduate, and I served in the Army for 7 years after I left here, and we'll show you the next slide here. I received an ARCOM from the Army for my work in Germany. I thought that was kind of cool. They awarded me with that. My journey here in Pueblo and Black history is kind of off the wall. We talked about Ruth Steele. Now, Ruth Steele was she was a foundation of Black history in Pueblo. She collected everything she could find. She had the Lincoln home, and that home was actually in slum blight for a while, and she was actually able to claim that building and turn it into a museum. And so I learned a whole lot about her through working with her on the orphanage and old folks home. I also did some research about Civil War and Indian soldiers that were buried at Roselawn Cemetery. And I did this long before I became employed at Roselawn. But it was really interesting. You know, it's like, oh my God, I had no idea that they were even here. So I thought this would be interesting to learn about. Cathay Williams, William Cathay. I did some research about that, and I thought that those were important pieces of information. Okay. That's okay. World War I did research on World War I soldiers, and I didn't just stop at Roselawn, but the group of people that were working with me, we went to Mountain View and the Pioneer Cemetery to look for soldiers that were buried in those locations. I did U.S. military history, breaking barriers. I created a display that's still at Weisbrod Aircraft Museum with a bunch of black faces on the wall, and I asked people, if you want to learn about who these people were, just ask me, and I'll take you through it. I did the African Americans that are buried in Roselawn's Block 12. Now, you may not think that we had a segregated cemetery. We didn't, but we had segregated areas within the cemetery. And so most of the African Americans that were buried in the Roselawn Cemetery in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and then on into today. We're buried in Block 12 in Roselawn. I worked on a presentation to discover all the black doctors in town. I worked with Calvin Kimberlin's story. I did key black figures in Pueblo's history. So there's a lot of different things that I worked on. When we started talking about Pueblo's history, how many people know about James Beckwourth? You young people don't know. Okay. During his lifetime, James Beckwourth was known for many things. He was a fur trader, a businessman. He adopted by the Crow Nation. He was a tribal leader, a rancher, a scout, a soldier, a surveyor. He did all kinds of things. He was enslaved until he was an adolescent, when he was emancipated by his white father. In 1830, he left for the Rocky Mountain West and entered into a lucrative fur trading business. On October 1st, 1842, the legendary frontiersman helped to establish an adobe trading post near the confluence of the Arkansas and the Fountain Rivers. Anybody know where that is? El Pueblo Museum, you know? Take a look. He was there. He was there when they came up with the name, and some people even say that he may have actually created the name Pueblo for the name of this little town. And I think he's pretty significant. So I wanted at least to have him up here, let you guys get a chance to see him, think about it, research him. It's a good story. When we talk about the African Americans here in Pueblo, in 1870, the census reported that there were 26 African Americans here in Pueblo. 26. These guys were cowboys, domestic workers, farmers, porters. In 1880, the census reported 150 black residents here in Pueblo. Now, one of the things Ruth Steele used to tell me, she said this was a black town. And I said, Ruth, that can't be possible. We made up about 1% to 3% of the total population of Pueblo. So I think you'll agree with me, it's probably not a black town. But we had 3 residents between the 1870s and 1880s that were still on the census report. Just 3 people. Okay, so the rest of that 150 came from new people coming into the Pueblo area. These new people were blacksmiths, cooks, expressmen, machinists, and stonemasons. Between 1885 and 1900, the smelters and the steel works employed black workers. In a book that was written in 2017 by Lois Contator, the establishment of the African American community, Pueblo was considered a melting pot of ethnicities and different cultures. It began as a trade fort at the convergence of the Arkansas and Fountain Rivers, and with the development of the industrial age, Pueblo became the largest steelmaking manufacturer west of the Mississippi River. Pueblo had a thriving energy economy based on agriculture, coal mining, and steel production. Pueblo was Colorado's second largest city until 1930. As a matter of fact, they considered making Pueblo the state capital for a period of time. And then they said, yeah, Denver's probably better. During the boom years, Pueblo became one of Colorado's most diverse communities, bringing together African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and European immigrants, primarily from Italy and Central Europe. We talked about Eliza Boone. Eliza Boone was first enslaved by Colonel Albert Galatian Boone, one of Daniel Boone's grandsons, one of his grandsons. Sparked by the allure of the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, Colonel Boone moved to Colorado in 1863 and established a settlement which was called Boonesville. It's now known as Boone, Colorado. And that's about 27 miles east of Pueblo. Colonel Boone emancipated Eliza at the end of the Civil War, and she moved into Pueblo. She didn't like Boone. While she was in Pueblo, she was well known and highly regarded by the city and supported herself by washing and nursing. She lived in a cabin built for her by Colonel Boone on 4th Street. And I think that 4th Street address is right around where Wendy's is. Okay? She lived on the rental income that she had from a small house that she owned. She had 2 daughters and a son, as well as a granddaughter. And in November 1893, Eliza Boone died at her home at the age of 105. In 1872, a 14-year-old woman, her name was Lily Wright, gave birth to the first black child born in Pueblo County. Zachariah Wright was her second child of the 4 that she had. Lily was a former slave, and she was one of Pueblo's earliest residents. She was noted for her civic and social contributions to the community. Mrs. Wright was buried at Roselawn Cemetery in 1945, and 3 of her children were also buried there, not Zachariah. William Cathay Williams. This story is something that a lot of people have heard about. The black woman who served in the infantry after the Civil War, right? Everybody knows that little story? It's a cool story. However, I kind of have some disagreement with it. Cathay Williams was also often described as an African-American woman who famously disguised herself as a man and changed her name to William Cathay in order to serve in the segregated 38th Infantry Regiment, which was formed in 1866, just after the Civil War. This unit was reorganized later, 2 years later, into the 24th and 25th Infantries. And those units became a part of what we know as the Buffalo Soldiers. It's a story that we want to believe is true, but when you look at this in history and you start looking at the facts, think about it, guys. How does a woman disguise herself as a man and stay with a couple of hundred guys traveling on foot or in wagons across the country to New Mexico? She's sick 5 times during the time that she was in the service for 2 years. She stayed in the hospital for 2 months with pneumonia, and they didn't discover that she was a woman. Okay? This story is so big. There are statues made of this woman. There's all kinds of things that have happened that people are just diving into this story. I don't believe that that's true. I don't believe that this is a woman. So closer, if you look closer at it and you look at the scrutiny of history, it tells another story. Cathay was a man and at times presented himself as a woman, not the other way around. In the beginning, in 1866, Private Cathay spent 2 years in the 38th Infantry Regiment. Cathay's enlistment papers indicated that he was free from all bodily defects. See if I can get over here. He's free from all defects. His commander, when they finally decided to ask this person to leave the military, said that he was an okay soldier, but he wasn't very good at it. Okay? The surgeon that inspected this person said that he, again, was not a very good soldier and had some infirmities and probably would never become a good soldier, so they medically discharged him. This person went from Fort Bayard in New Mexico to Raton, to Trinidad, to Pueblo, back down to Raton, dressed as a woman. Okay? It wasn't until later when 1892, see if I can drop down here and read the rest of this. I don't know if I can get over there. There we go. Cathay, or William Cathay, applied for disability under the alias of William Cathay. She alleged deafness was caused by the military service and the claim was denied. In 1897, the Colorado Weekly Chieftain and the Rocky Mountain News published articles on Cathay's non-binary representation. In other words, this person is a male. Many are heavily invested on the mythical story of Cathay Williams, but the true story of Cathay Williams, or William Cathay, is also intriguing. After 10 years of being confined at the Colorado State Hospital, the name was changed to William Cather, and William Cather was buried in an unmarked grave at Roselawn Cemetery. Here's another gentleman. A lot of you have probably not heard this story. This is a story about Calvin Kimblern. Calvin Kimblern was a former corporal in the 25th Infantry Regiment and was accused of the attempted murder of his wife and the murder of two preteen white girls while they were employed, he and his wife were employed, at the Fry's Orphanage here in Pueblo. By the way, that's on the north side of town, between 28th and 29th Streets. Kimblern was said to have fled to Denver the day that he actually had committed these crimes. He was captured very shortly after he got to Denver, which is amazing, in 1900. Information went out. I want to show you something I think is kind of important. This is a book that I've compiled about William Cather. This book has all of the articles written by all the newspapers across the United States about this killing here in Pueblo, about killing two white girls in Pueblo. It was amazing how much was written the day after this murder was committed and went across the entire nation. He was captured and brought back to Pueblo the next day, all right? There are stories then about this person's going to get back to Pueblo and is going to get hung because justice, an ear for an ear, an eye for an eye, he's killed two white girls, therefore we're going to kill this person. He was met, the train that they were coming into Pueblo was met at the 8th Street sidetrack. At the 8th Street sidetrack, there were 3,000 to 5,000 people on the track that stopped the train. They pulled him off the train while he was still handcuffed, put a rope around his neck, and drug him from the railroad tracks to Santa Fe Avenue and 8th. From there, they climbed up to the top of a flagpole. It was actually a telegraph pole. They threw the rope over the top and hung him. The rope broke, not once, not twice, but 3 times before they were successful in hanging Calvin Kindler. Some of the stories recount that there were as many as 10,000 people standing around watching this hanging. We assume that he was probably pretty close to death before he actually got hung. None of the coroners, none of the mortuaries wanted to take him. They said he was put into either a pigsty or was given to one of the cemeteries and put into a pauper's grave. We don't know where he's at. But things changed in Pueblo and across Colorado. They started to reinstitute death penalties for murderers. So this is this story where you have to think about it. The justice was, we're just going to hang this person, okay? Calvin Kindler. You can't imagine how many stories were written about this. Pueblo's police officers in 1902. See any black faces in there? There's a couple of them. So in 1902, we had black officers here in Pueblo. I'll introduce you to a couple of them here. Maybe. I think we got it. Okay, good. Deputy William Guy. Oh, no. Hood is the first one. Officer Willis Hood is one of those officers, and I'm not sure which one he is. There's no other records indicating which one of these guys is him. He was a scale master at the Bessemer Steelworks and led Bessemer Brass Band in the late 1890s. He began his Colorado law enforcement career by securing the mines at Rouse near Huerfano County. Okay? He later became a Pueblo City patrolman. Upon his death, a newspaper printed this tribune. He obtained the position of policeman on the streets of Pueblo, and all felt safe under his kindly protection. As the protector of the public on the streets of Pueblo or deep down in the mines at Rouse, Willis played the part of a man above petty things, one who believes in his country and was happy to defend its institutions and bear his shame or his share of the burdens. So that was Officer Willis Hood. Deputy William Guy. William Guy served as a deputy sheriff in Pueblo County under Sheriff James L. Beeman in the early 1900s. Deputy Sheriff William Guy, his law enforcement career ended due to a severe attack of rheumatism in 1903. This gentleman here is Officer Frank Clay McClanahan. He served as a Pueblo police officer for 27 years. He was born in 1876 in Florence, Alabama. He arrived in Pueblo around 1906 from Bessemer, Alabama, to work on the massive CF&I steel mill, bringing with him valuable knowledge as a furnace tapper. However, the promise of a job based on his skills was quickly overshadowed by the prejudices at the time. he and his new superintendent, who was also from Bessemer, were told plainly that no black man was allowed to tap the furnaces. And that's a pretty serious job, being able to open and close those big vats of melted steel. So, facing this harsh lack or reality, his supervisor or superintendent, determined to help him, found him another job opportunity. It was in a remarkable turn of events, and that's how he became the only member of the Pueblo police force at that time. With a quiet dignity and dedication, he served the city for 27 years and became the first black officer to retire from the police department. While serving on the police force, he was frequently approached by travelers who would ask him if they could find a safe and affordable place to stay. Sensing a critical need in the community, he and his wife, Annie, took a bold step. They constructed the McClanahan building on Evans Avenue. This building became far more than just a structure. It was a thriving boarding house and vital to the community. It included a family-owned living quarters at 1333 and a half East Evans, a rental apartments for residents at 1332 East Evans, which included a restaurant owned by and operated by Mr. and Mrs. Harold Young, and a swap shop run by Mr. and Mrs. Merritt. One of the most significant holdings that they had, the McClanahan family had, was a parcel of land on Prairie Avenue. Okay? Safeway, King Soopers, that area there. He later sold that land back to the city. And if you want to believe this, that became the first airport in Pueblo, the land that he owned. Frank was a community organizer, was one of the first officers of the Arkansas Valley Colored Elks Lodge. He died on June 26, 1949, at the age of 73, and was buried in Mount View Cemetery. So we're moving forward in time, right? So now we're at 1900. There were reported 1,384 black residents in Pueblo County. There's evidence that the African American population was larger than Denver at that time. Black residents only made up 1 to 3.2% of Pueblo's total population. In 1920, there were 1,559 residents that were African Americans. African Americans migrating to Pueblo didn't escape racism, though, just in case you thought they did. Segregation was enforced in public spaces like theaters, hotels, restaurants, swimming pools, and schools. Yet residential segregation never took root in Pueblo. The African Americans lived pretty much wherever they wanted to, except for some of the high places like just west of here. What's that called? There's a housing area there. Aberdeen. Aberdeen was not integrated for quite a while. Okay. There were places that the African Americans lived. They lived downtown in Pueblo. They lived in Pepper Sauce Bottom. Everybody know Pepper Sauce Bottom? That's where the train tracks are, where the mall is downtown there.
That's what my family lives.
Yep. Okay, Pepper Sauce Bottom. They were on Goat Hill. By the way, down by Pepper Sauce Bottom, there were several African American churches erected there. And unfortunately, I don't get to talk about the churches or the ministers today, but there was quite a thriving community until 1921. Anything happened here in 1921?
Flood.
Big flood, the Great Flood. Okay? So Goat Hill was a more eclectic area that that was a home to several brothels, as well as the original location of the colored orphanage and old folks home. You mentioned that the Lincoln home was there in 1906. They didn't actually move into the Lincoln homes until 1914. Up until then, they were on top of Goat Hill with all the good people. In 1903, there was a letter written by one of the doctors in Pueblo, and he talked about what the expectation of the African Americans that were living here, and he believed that all black residents should own their own homes, and if not, leave the city. That was his opinion. So let's talk about Pueblo black doctors. Dr. Joseph Clarence Wright, this is the man that authored that story. Quite honestly, folks, this was one of those things that I was so happy to have read. It was called The Pueblo Citizens, and it was written by Dr. Clarence Wright, Joe Clarence Wright. And he talked about all of the aspects of Pueblo and the African American community within that article. And it was just an absolutely beautiful piece of work. But let me tell you about him. He came to Pueblo in 1900. Dr. Wright was a native of South Carolina, came to Pueblo in the spring of 1900, and has since been located at 200 South Union. Everybody knows South Union Avenue, right? There are a lot of things that happened on Union. He graduated from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania in 1893 with a Bachelor's of Arts degree, entered Howard Medical School in 1893, and graduated in 1897, immediately taking up a practice of medicine in Newberry, South Carolina, where he remained until 1899. During that time, he received an honorary Master's of Arts degree from Lincoln University. Dr. Wright was still a young man, had a large practice here in Pueblo, and looked upon as an example of ambitious and studious as a black man. I thought it was pretty amazing. I thought, God, there were black doctors here in town? 1900? Woo! Dr. Samuel Alfonso Huff, the second black doctor, came to Pueblo in 1902. He was born in January of 1879 in Tennessee, grew up on a farm in Alabama, and at the age of 23 graduated from Meharry Medical College, Nashville, Tennessee. In 1902, he opened his practice here in the spring. He lived in Bessemer. It was kind of interesting when I started looking at these doctors. I was told originally that Dr. Corwin from Corwin Hospitals, that Dr. Corwin actually brought these guys here. It turns out none of these black doctors got to practice in the hospital. They had to carry their little black bag, and either they treated their patients at home or they treated them in their office. But they did not go to the hospitals and practice in the hospitals. He lived in Bessemer and ran a medical practice, and alternately in Pueblo, in Bessemer and also in Pueblo. Dr. Huff was also known as a businessman who had an interest in a drugstore. He actually had a drugstore over on Northern Avenue. In 1907, he was appointed as Pueblo's police surgeon. He was responsible for the medicines and emergency plans here in Pueblo, and did that job for 2 years before they said, we don't need to do this anymore. Thanks a lot. And they let him go. In 2010, or excuse me, in 1910, he moved his practice to Denver and continued practicing medicine in Denver. Simon Peter Douglas. Simon Peter Douglas graduated from Meharry Medical College in 1904. He came to Pueblo in 1905 and established his physician and surgeon practice. He He lived on Ormond Avenue, and I actually took a picture of the home that he lived in. There was an article in the newspapers that indicated that his home was sabotaged, and somebody put gasoline into one of the rooms and started a fire, and no one was hurt. But I think the message was you need to move out of this area. Okay. In 1906, here we go. Let me go back up again. 1904, the Federation of Colored Women Club established a Colorado Orphans and Old Folks Association. In 1906, they were able to secure the old Pueblo Hospital brick building at 306 East 1st Street on the top of Tenderfoot Hill, or Goat Hill. Dr. Douglas served as a physician on the advisory board and later was the Sunday school superintendent for the orphanage. So he was quite involved in the orphanage. And as a matter of fact, most of the black community was very much involved with the orphanage. The Pueblo Sun wrote an article on March the 12th, 1908. A colored Republican club was organized, and the meetings were held on 121 Grand Avenue last evening. Officers were elected. Dr. Simon Peter Douglas was the president. I thought that was kind of interesting. All of these guys were very much involved in the community. Dr. Rufus Cassius Redd. He was born in 1890 in Martinsville, Virginia. He earned his medical degree in 1918. He was a soldier who served in France in World War I. They didn't recognize that he was a doctor, and so he was an enlisted man in the war. But he did come back to Pueblo and worked as a doctor here. He and his wife were members of St. Paul's or First AME Church in Pueblo. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of him, so you can take a pic on any of those guys and decide that he might be one of those. Yeah, I kind of like that. This is the last doctor that I talk about. You can kind of read this. He graduated from Manual High School in Denver. This is Dr. Clarence Fitzhume's home. In 1913, went to Howard University, opened a dental practice in Denver in 1920, and 1926 he opened a dental practice in Pueblo. But by that time, I think that the African American population was starting to dwindle, and so I think he decided to go ahead and move his practice back to Denver. During the Depression, he performed free extractions for people as a part of the community chest program. Dr. Holmes retired from his dental practice in 1975. Kind of amazing, huh? This is another amazing person. I didn't have a clue that there was actually a law attorney here in Pueblo. Probably the second one in the state of Colorado. Came to Pueblo. This is William Townsend. He was born in Huntsville, Alabama in 1854, which would have made him probably a slave. He was emancipated in 1857. In 1860, his family moved to Leavenworth, Kansas. He graduated from the University of Kansas, served as the Leavenworth City Attorney for 2 years, moved to Pueblo in 1901. Townsend's legal reputation grew substantially in 1902 when he successfully persuaded, this after Calvin Kimbler was hung. But in 1902, he was able to successfully persuade the Board of Pardons to stay and commute the death sentence of his client, Lawrence Hex, to a life sentence. And this was 7 days before the guy was due to be hung. Townsend had defended Hex in the first capital murder trial in Pueblo under Colorado's new death penalty statute. In 1904, he became the second African-American admitted to the practice of law before the federal bar in circuit and district courts in Colorado. Townsend was also rooted in Pueblo's black community. He served as a legal advisor to the colored orphanage and was a lifelong advocate for the black home ownership. After being subjected to unsuccessful lawsuits for contempt of court and perjury, Townsend left Pueblo in 1909. Guess I didn't like what he had to say sometimes. Okay? And he opened a practice in Denver with George G. Ross, forming what the newspaper describes as the first colored law firm in the far West. Townsend died in Denver in 1917, short life. More than 2,000 people attended his funeral. Another interesting fact that I came upon, this is a list of all of the newspapers that were black owned or black operated or black published here in the city of Pueblo. Now, I'm not going to go through that whole list there, but I'll tell you this. I have researched high and low for articles written in any of these newspapers, and I have not found one article written in those newspapers. And you can see the years that those newspapers operated. I've not seen one article written in any of these newspapers. And I find that to be pretty sad.
Pretty much eliminated it.
What was that?
Pretty much eliminated it.
Yeah. I'm still looking, but I have not found one. So we've mentioned the colored orphanage several times, right? In case you don't know what it looks like, there it is. 2713 and 2715 North Grand Avenue. You can see it from the highway. There's a statue of Dr. Martin Luther King and Emmett Till next to the building. But these buildings were built around the 1880s and early 1900s, 1904, I think the second building was built. They're built on the same foundation. The boys and men lived on the north side of that building. They lived on 2715. The girls and women lived on the 2713 side, the south side of the building. There normally were an average of about 30 kids inside of the facility at any time. One of the stories that Ruth would tell me is that this is the only house, this is the only orphanage for coloreds and old folks, including former slave house, west of the Mississippi River. I told Ruth, you can't tell people that anymore. She said, why? I says, because there were more orphanages around the state and around the country that you can't tell people that this is the only one. She said, what if I say it's the only former slave house? I said, you can't tell me that either. So we had her change her story. It not only functioned as an orphanage, and I think people don't understand this necessarily. When we talk about an orphanage, we think these are kids that don't have parents, right? They're not just kids without parents. This was probably the only place in Pueblo that a parent could take their child, place them into a home care situation while they were working. And if you can imagine both parents working, you didn't want those kids hanging out at home all day by themselves, so you give them to the orphanage. The orphanage took them, carried them for Monday through Friday, and then they went back and stayed with their parents for the weekend. It was the only place that they could be. Okay? They weren't allowed to go into the Catholic orphanage or to the McClellan. They weren't allowed in those places. The orphanage closed in 1963. So the orphanage operated in these buildings, until 1963. And by the way, I failed to mention this, and let me mention this. When the orphanage took over these buildings, they broke the wall between the buildings and made it adjoining. So the buildings you can actually walk between the two buildings. It's kind of neat little thing. This building is also on the Colorado list of historical properties. When Ruth came back to town after working in Denver for a while, one of her pet projects was to save this building or these buildings. They were in slum life. They were owned by E.M. Christmas, who was a pretty wealthy dude here in town. And she badgered him for about 3 or 4 years before he finally said, "Look, take the buildings." He says, "Give me $1." So he gave her the entire property, including those buildings, for $1. She turned this building into a museum, and for about 18 years it operated as the Pueblo Martin Luther King Jr. Museum and Cultural Center. Okay, and, we've lost the buildings, so we're not in the buildings any longer. The buildings are now operated under Friendly Harbor, which is a mental health organization. But they do still work with us. I still have the statue of Dr. King and Emmett Till outside of the building. This was a newspaper clipping and talked about the former slaves that were here in Pueblo. This is a picture of those former slaves. Some of them may have actually lived at the home. So this picture here is about a guy that ran a business here in Pueblo. Sam Nelson. Anybody ever see that building downtown?
Sam Nelson Furniture.
That's the guy. He was a successful businessman. He was a black furniture store owner on 107 South Union Avenue. The building and his name still stands on the Riverwalk. Go check it out. We're not sure exactly when he actually took the building, but in 1921, in the Great Flood, that building was also underwater for that period, but the second floor wasn't. This is a picture that was taken, and I just found it last night on the web, and I thought, we'll throw it out there. If you go down to the Riverwalk, you'll see Mad Sam's Furniture, right? Well, it had nothing to do with him. There was actually another owner that changed the name.
Was he a Grandmaster Mason?
Yep. Here, I'll tell you a little bit about him. He rebuilt his business after the Great Flood. Sam placed an ad on June 22nd, 1921 in the Daily Chieftain, and it read, "We have thousands of dollars worth of goods on the second floor, which are high and dry. These all go in the sale. We want to close out this entire stock to make room for new goods. We want to keep pace with the new Pueblo. Sales start Wednesday. Sam Nelson Furniture Company." By 1825, Sam Nelson was doing so well, he bought a full-page ad in the Pueblo City Directory offering furniture, stoves, carpets, and household specialties. He and his wife, Maddie, lived in the 2-room apartment above the store. Maddie died in 1927, and both of those folks are buried at Roselawn. In 1922, he became the most worshipful grandmaster of Colorado, and the jurisdiction F and AM, and I don't know what that means. I'll try to figure that out later. The name Mad Sam was coined by its new owner after Sam Nelson sold the business and the store name in 1926. Okay, military. We're getting close, guys. Pueblo cemeteries have veterans and officers who served in African American segregated units in Roselawn, Mountain View, Pioneer cemeteries. In Roselawn, there were 5 Civil War officers that served with the African American soldiers. These are white officers that served with black units during the Civil War. There are 6 Civil War soldiers, including one soldier who served not only in the Civil War, but also became a Buffalo soldier with the 9th U.S. Cavalry. That's buried at Roselawn. In Mountain View, there's 1 Civil War officer, 2 Civil War soldiers, 2 from the Indian Wars and Spanish-American Wars, and 7 from World War I. In the Pioneer Cemetery, there are 2 Civil War soldiers. I thought it was real interesting to know also that there were officers that came to Pueblo and were buried at Roselawn. But we'll talk about them in a second. I'll just give you the names of these guys real quickly. Samuel Dean, Preston Harris, Hardy Faulkner, David Smith, Thomas Walker, George Washington, James W. Williams. All of these guys were buried at Roselawn. In 2014, I started to figure out who they were. The guys that didn't have markers on their graves, we went to the VA and asked to get markers, and the VA turned us down. Then the executive director at Roselawn, Kevin McCarthy at the time, he agreed to give us the markers. And we did a ceremony to honor those soldiers in 2015. That was my first project. There were white officers that served with the black troops that are buried at Roselawn. This guy here, I believe that he spent time at the orphanage. I see lots of little indicators that he was there. His name is Wilbur Alfred Taylor. He was born in slavery and served as an Indian fighter with Troop D, 10th U.S. Cavalry. During the course of his life, Private Taylor was told of numerous encounters that he had with the Indians. In 1872, his troop was traveling from its fort in Dodge City, Kansas, to Indian Territory and Supply, Oklahoma, to quell Indian troubles. The last fight that Taylor engaged in was a detachment of 27 soldiers that wiped out an Indian war party of 17. So there's little stories about these guys, and it was quite interesting. In that fight, he said a squaw seized a cap and ball pistol that her brave had dropped and began firing at the soldiers at what he called was telling effect. So she was pretty accurate at it. And it was necessary to shoot her. And that was the only time that Taylor said that he had ever seen a woman shot and killed by soldiers. So there were stories about this guy, and quite interesting to have found his grave and done some research on him. I found this one kind of interesting. You see there's on the top group there, Private Cassius M. Lewis. He was also known as Cassius Clay. I thought, whoa, I wonder if he's related to Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali. So I sent a note to them, and they never responded. So that was fun. This man here, Kinsey Hall, Kinsey Hull was one of what Ruth would call the 9 to Shrine. There were 9 African Americans during World War II that were here in Pueblo and assigned to the Pueblo airport to take care of the buildings, the structures, the heating, the cooling, feed the folks coming in to train to fly those bombers. And Kinsey Hull was one of those gentlemen. He lived here until 99 years and 2 months shy of being 100 years old. Good friend of mine. This guy here I wanted to bring up because his parents came to town shortly after the orphanage opened in 1906, after their parents were killed in an accident. This is the son of one of those people. His name is Richard Lee Biffle. It's quite a neat story about him. I'll just give you a little piece of it. He was born in 1920, the son of Richard Sr. He loved flying, and his love for flying began in Pueblo in 1920. He was inspired by barnstorming pilots that he saw at the Colorado State Fair. At 8 years old, Biffle plunked down $1 for an airplane ride. He never rested on the ground again. At first, he was rejected to become a pilot in World War II, but he did take civilian pilot training at Pueblo Community College. Can you believe that? His future wife and he left Pueblo in his 20s to pursue his dream of flying. A year later, he was accepted into Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, and upon graduation in 1944, he joined the famed Tuskegee Airmen. Biffle was promoted to first lieutenant in the Air Force and became the president of the Swoops Aviation Club in Denver. And that was to keep kids, African-American kids, with the dream of flying. And I thought that was pretty amazing. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. And one of the most interesting things about him is he was one of the first, he was the first black pilot named to the Customs Department Drug Interdiction Air Patrol that patrolled the U.S.-Mexico border. He died in December of 2000 in Denver and was buried in Fort Logan National Cemetery. Carl Thomas. For 3 decades, Carl Thomas was a familiar, welcoming face to anyone who traveled by train into Pueblo. Thomas was born on July 15, 1909 in Joplin, Missouri. He came here to Pueblo and he was known as the unofficial ambassador of Pueblo because he greeted people when they came in on the train, gave them instructions on how to get to where they wanted to go, and was sorely missed by the city when trains stopped coming into Pueblo. This is Dr. Steele, Dr. Ruth Dolores Woodfork Steele. She was the founder of the Pueblo Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday Commission. She was my friend and my mentor. That's us up at the Marade in Denver. I told you that we have the statue just outside of the Lincoln home on Grand Avenue. Ruth would tell us that Pueblo has the only statue of Dr. Martin Luther King and Emmett Till in the universe. I said, okay. I guess I can't take that one from you. So I thought that was pretty neat. And as I said before, I am a reenactor with Buffalo Soldiers, and I represent Company M, the Calico Company of the 10th U.S. Cavalry, and this is my horse, Duchess. I think that's it. Yeah, this is the fun part. Because now I can ad lib.
They lost that orphanage now?
Yeah, the orphanage, we lost that probably around 2018. And it became,
I think it was just a couple of years ago, there was some sort of event there.
oh, I still do things there.
Okay.
Yeah, I still am responsible. I work with the folks that run the home, and I still do my march to honor Dr. King on a Saturday before the celebration. I still would do presentations there, so it's still quite a thriving place. Any other questions? Was this interesting? There's so much to learn about African American history. It's like, how do you squeeze it down into a small envelope? What was amazing to me is that it was a lot of work trying to find it. Truly, I've spent a lot of time working on this thing. I'll show you another book that I worked with Lucille Corsentino at Roselawn Cemetery, and I talked about Block 12 being where the African Americans are buried. I went through every grave, the information on every grave, and I documented through Ancestry, through Fold 3 if they were in the military. I looked at all of the Colorado newspapers, the historic newspapers. I went to the library and researched. This is one of 3 books that I have for the 500 plus people that are buried at Roselawn, most of them without markers on their graves. If you go look at the area where those people are buried, there's absolutely no marker indicating that there was a life there. So I've been working on that as a project. The Cathay Williams story, there's a whole team of us that has spent a ton of time trying to research and look at all the documents. And I went to Houston, Texas, to the National Buffalo Soldier Organization meeting. They had an annual meeting, and I told them my idea of Cathay Williams. And I said, we're talking about a person who maybe was trans. What's the possibilities that this person was a guy, And they said, no, that's not our Cathay Williams. So even with evidence, they don't want to change their opinions about that. Calvin Kimbler, this story just amazed me. The reason it amazed me was because this man was a corporal in the 25th Infantry. He spent probably 10, 15 years in the Army. He went to Supreme Court and testified. He was an educated black man, and I think when he came to Pueblo, somebody decided that this guy's got to go. And I think that the stories were too clean, too organized. They were there. The day after the murder, these things were published across the United States. It's like, how could you do that? I mean, he incensed the nation. Absolutely incensed the whole nation. If people could have gotten into Pueblo quickly enough to participate in the hanging, they would have done it. And there were articles that said that. If we could have got there, we would have been a part of this hanging. And I thought, how is that possible? That this guy, one guy, could create that kind of a thing, The other interesting thing I saw about him was when I looked up his marriage record. He got out of the Army in January, he got married in March, and he was killed in May, okay? The marriage document in Denver says that this white man, Calvin Kimbler, married a white woman, Hattie, and it's like, wait a minute, how is this possible, okay? So there were a lot of things that caused me to want to look further into this story. Yes?
What year was he killed?
1900.
1900. Okay, because I noticed a lot of stuff is happening in the late teens, early 20s, and I know race relations get really bad after World War I. There's
Oh, yeah.
Red Summer, Is there any kind of impact in Pueblo that was felt from any refugees from Tulsa or anything like that?
You know, I don't know that yet. I would imagine, there were two hangings, or hanging and a burning in Colorado in 1900. Preston Porter up by Lyman was burned at the stake, okay, for murdering a little white girl, right? He probably had absolutely nothing to do with it. They needed somebody, and they brought him back from Denver, and they burned him at stake. And this guy here, I think that even though the Klan is not really talked about much, I think the Klan did things that probably put us into jeopardy here, okay? And if it wasn't the Klan, there was other groups that would have done that.
Yeah, they're local.
Yeah, and that, actually the Klan was bigger than you think. The saddle that they talked about, I'll tell you quickly a story about that saddle. The saddle, I'm a big guy. I don't know if you know it, but if you were in the cavalry, you couldn't have weighed more than about 145 pounds. That was a few years ago for me, okay? Okay, I was maybe 12. But I rode a normal cavalry saddle for a while, but I absolutely had no room to move. And so I saw on eBay this saddle that was put up for auction. And you'll see the saddle. The saddle's at the El Pueblo Museum right now. But that saddle is there, and basically the guy that was selling it said, you might want to do some research about the guy that owned this saddle before you decide you want to buy it. And I said, oh, okay. So I look him up, Dr. John Galen Locke. And I come to find out he hangs out with Stapleton up in Denver and all the other muckety-mucks that are happen to be tied to the KKK. And he is the Grand Dragon, the founder of the KKK here in Pueblo, or in Colorado. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. It's a bigger saddle, so it's like 22 inches as opposed to 11 and a half and 12 inches. So, you know, there's a little more room for the tush. And I thought, I'm going to buy the saddle. I don't care. And so I purchased the saddle. And the guy told me as I made the purchase, he says, this guy's probably going to turn over in his grave to know that he sold the saddle to an African American. I said, I'm a reenactor. I need a bigger saddle. Thank you very much. So I thought that was a cool story. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
For those who weren't allowed to practice in the hospital, were they still paid for the hospital and as much as it?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I read a story about Dr. Cobb and Dr. Red, and they were paid in chickens and other things that, you know, if people didn't have money, they would take whatever they could get. So they weren't getting wealthy here in Pueblo, and I think a lot of those doctors then ultimately ended up leaving. What was kind of amazing to me is the number of deaths in Pueblo. The African Americans died. It just seemed like they would come to Pueblo and then they were dead. And I don't know why, because there's no real reports as to why all these people are dead. But you know, when I go through all those people that were buried in Roselawn, there's no reason why they were buried. It's just they're dead. And I think, how could you live 35 years, 40 years, 50 years, and then come to Pueblo and die? So I don't know what happened there yet. But I'll leave that as an open thought. Any other questions? Was it okay?
Yeah, it's great.
That's fantastic.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate that.
Thank you, folks. I do have the sign-up sheet for email list if you are not on it already and want to be informed of the upcoming talks each month. Go ahead and put your name and email down, and I'll get it sent out to you.